There are a few different ways of looking at motivation in the field of psychology. Here are the evolutionary perspective, which used to be called the instinct theory, and the drive reduction approach. In the evolutionary perspective, followers of Darwin's evolutionary theory propose that human beings and other species survive because of the way their genes were passed on to future generations. Darwin believed that we're born with certain innate abilities that were not taught. Those who survive will pass along their genes, so survival of the fittest is an expression associated with Darwin's evolutionary theory. Instincts are the focus of this theory. Even though many researchers view a newly born infant's rooting reflex as a true inborn instinct, for a while people went overboard with labeling all behaviors as instincts, such as with the self-assertion instinct. Asserting your needs and wants probably has quite a bit to do with what you learn through your social interactions with others, so it's likely not an innate skill you had right out of the womb. As a result of the over-labeling, a lot of dispute arose about what constitutes an instinct. And even today, some aren't even sure that humans have actual instincts at all. We agree that animals do, but it's possible that humans don't have any, or at least a far reduced number, than many types of animals. The drive reduction approach posits that when we need something, we'll feel a drive toward meeting that need. The drive is prompted by the need. This is due in part to our body's desire to maintain homeostasis, or a constant, steady state. The word literally means staying the same. Our bodies want us to have a steady level of sugar flowing through our bloodstreams at all times. We need that blood sugar to function properly, so if yours falls too low, you might find yourself suddenly craving an afternoon snack, and you'll likely want something sweet or high in carbs. You'll then be motivated to find food and eat. A drive is anything that motivates our behavior, that causes us to do something in order to meet some kind of need, and a drive can either be primary or secondary. Primary drives are those we follow in order to live. Secondary drives aren't required to live, but are necessary at least for good adjustment, and these secondary drives are brought on as a result of us living our lives. Nobody has to teach you how to breathe to get the oxygen required for your survival, a primary drive, but you were taught to want money in order to buy the things that you want. It's a secondary drive to want money. Another possible explanation for motivation is the arousal approach. Y'all probably know some people who are adrenaline junkies. They seem to crave, even need, excitement in their lives to feel happy. Even for those of us who don't have the need for such high levels of arousal, all of us do have some need to be aroused or to be stimulated and engaged with our worlds. So when you're feeling bored, you'll stop reading your textbook and do something that's fun to you to boost your arousal. People with antisocial personality disorder who become serial murderers have lower than normal arousal. Hopefully you won't go kill somebody every time you're bored, but human beings have a real and intense need to maintain some level of arousal. The incentive approach states that we're motivated to achieve certain things in our lives, like getting good grades, good jobs, and good money. Those things that we want, grades, jobs, money, are incentives that motivate us to behave in certain ways, and they're external, meaning that these things don't exist within ourselves, like happiness or confidence. A lot of psychologists tie this theory in with the drive reduction theory by viewing the drives as stimuli that push us into behaviors, our inner pushers. The incentives proposed by this approach are then what pull our behaviors. The outer pulls are the incentives we desire. Our drive to eat and pay our bills is what pushes us to do well in school, so that one day we can get great jobs that pay good money. Money draws us or pulls us toward it because we've learned that we need it to get our stuff. Cognitivists believe that people's thoughts, expectations, and goals shape what motivate them. Abraham Maslow developed a very well-known theory of motivation called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Maslow proposed that before we can think about things like love and happiness, we have to first be alive. So we need to first meet our needs for food and water, the primary drives. After that, we need to be safe, and then we can keep moving up the ladder to achieve higher level things like feeling loved, and then finally feeling like we've reached our highest potential with the self-actualization stage. Toward the end of his life, Maslow added a sixth stage called self-transcendence, in which we become able to stop thinking only of ourselves and our own individual potential and work toward a society in which we are able to find meaning outside of ourselves. Maslow's theory was a true stage theory, meaning he believed we had to go through all of these stages in order, starting at the bottom of this pyramid and then working our way up, one level or stage at a time. In fact, some of his critics fault his theory because it's a stage theory. People have starved themselves as political statements, so it is possible to intentionally skip this so-called required foundational stage. But of course, Maslow wasn't wrong in thinking that people are in fact usually motivated to fill certain fundamental needs before moving on to the less essential needs. People do need food and water in order to live, and they need to have shelter and clothing to wear before they can think about finding true love and elevating their self-esteem. Now we'll shift gears a little bit to talk about hunger. Hunger is a need, a drive, and a motivator, so it fits in this lesson well. The hypothalamus is mainly focused on regulating how much food we eat. It also monitors the amount of glucose in our bloodstream, or our blood sugar levels. Glucose is the sugar that circulates in our bodies. If certain areas in the hypothalamus are damaged, you could either starve to death because you won't eat even when you need food, or you could become extremely obese because you won't stop eating even after you're full. If these areas in your brain aren't working like they do for people of average weight, you might be overweight, and it's not just because you're lazy or overeat. Researchers believe that we each have a unique set point for our weight. It's a set weight that our body thinks is ideal for us. Having a set weight is what can make dieting and losing weight hard, because our bodies try to outsmart us to keep us at the same weight. You've likely heard the expression fast metabolism. Some people just process their food more quickly than others. The faster that food is metabolized or converted into energy, allowing us to use our muscles and strain our brains, the more quickly we'll burn off calories. Your basal metabolic rate is your body's resting rate of energy expenditure. Many of the factors we just talked about are genetic. We inherit, at least to some degree, how fast our metabolism will be. But there are also environmental factors that influence our eating behaviors. Different societies view food differently. Here in the US, we celebrate just about everything with a meal or some kind of treat. Some societies, like countries in Europe, have dinner later in the day. Some cultures prioritize having more weight on you, which signifies that you're well off and have enough money to eat well. Of course, in our culture, where we have food readily available, being skinny is favored. What you eat will also depend in large part on where you live. I don't eat rats myself, but in some places, those are staples. Of course, we all have our own unique individual preferences, and if you have a sweet tooth, you'll probably eat more sugar than those who prefer salty snacks. If you're exposed to a wide variety of foods, you'll tend to eat more. You'll also eat more if you're given a large portion. That's called unit bias. A person's food preferences are in part genetically influenced, but you can also learn to associate warm fuzzy feelings with what you eat. And if that conditioning happens, you'll be more likely to keep eating that food in the future. Comfort foods are things that our moms made us, but as a species, we also crave carbs and sweets because these foods boost levels of serotonin in our brains, which makes us feel calmer. So foods like pasta and cake are comfort foods through their actual chemical makeup. Your body determines your set point. That's determined by your genes. But as we just discussed, your eating behaviors are also influenced by your environment. Your settling point takes into account all of these environmental and psychological influences. It's wherever you settle after all of these factors affect you. Now we'll switch gears and talk about emotions. Emotions involve more than thoughts passing through our minds. Although what we think is part of an emotional response, these responses also involve our body's physical reactions. When you feel love, you might have butterflies in your stomach. And certainly when you feel fear, your heart rate goes up. So emotions are a combination of three elements: bodily arousal, your heart beating more quickly when you realize you can't find your child; expressive behaviors, your frantic searching for your child; and conscious experience, both your thoughts, is this a kidnapping? And your feelings of panic, fear, and hopefully relief when you find your child. Why do we have emotions? Emotions focus us and get us riled up so that we're ready to act however we need to. We learn via our emotions as well. Typically, we want to avoid negative emotions, and sometimes this can be a good thing, but sometimes it can actually hurt us if we worry so much about the possibility of feeling something negative that we start avoiding emotions altogether. Most of us will likely want to repeat good emotions and will learn to behave in ways that increase the likelihood of experiencing more of those positive emotions. Emotions also help us engage with one another. When you share emotions with someone, that can bring you closer to each other. You're better able to feel empathy for your friend if you enter into that emotion with her. If I see a friend crying, I often start crying myself. I'm mirroring the emotion I see, which will aid the empathic connection I have with my friend. One note about empathy: while it helps us connect, thus fulfilling our need to belong, too much empathy can be harmful, bringing us down with a depressed person, for example. Remember William James? What was he? A behaviorist or a cognitivist? He was a behaviorist. He thought everything was all about stimuli responses and learning by associations. He said, "We feel sorry because we cry." He believed we don't cry because we feel sorry. The behavior comes first and then we feel something. He and another researcher, Carl Lang, developed this James Lang theory of emotions, where we experience emotions after we notice changes in our bodies or after we do something, a behavior. Other researchers thought that the ways in which our bodies express different emotions were too similar for the James Lang theory to make sense. For example, both anger and fear show similar patterns of autonomic arousal, the part of your nervous system that happens automatically with the sympathetic and parasympathetic subdivisions either revving you up for fight or flight or calming you down. Because of the fact that emotions can't easily be separated by simply looking at the body's physiological reactions, Cannon and Bard believed that emotions take place due to parallel processing. Both the body's physiological actions and the emotional experience are produced simultaneously. The thalamus sends messages out all at once. In their two-factor theory of emotion, Schachter and Singer felt like our interpretation of whatever's happening to us matters a lot. They thought that we have physiological activity, but that we must then, using our brains, interpret that activity. So the two factors are physical arousal and a cognitive label that we assign based on what we think is happening. We use context to interpret things, so the things that you see in your environment will help you decide if that noise you just heard was a twig falling from a tree limb or somebody tapping on your window. Schachter and Singer also identified what they called the spillover effect, which occurs when an intense emotion lingers and intensifies a subsequent emotion. If you nearly get into a car wreck and experience momentary terror, that might spill over into hysterical laughter for a few minutes after avoiding the wreck. Terror spills over into laughter. The lingering physical arousal intensifies the next emotion, which can often be an entirely different emotion, so it feels like a roller coaster ride. Here's a graphic to help you see the differences between these three models of emotions. Researchers haven't completely agreed on what the types of emotions are. Is pride an emotion, or just a combination of other, more basic emotions? What about love? Shame? Most of them at least agree on these basic emotions listed on the slide that are universal to all of us: happiness, anger, fear, sadness, disgust. In part, it's hard to study the different types of emotions because emotions don't always happen in just one part of the brain, and there aren't necessarily different physiological effects that happen for each emotion. The autonomic nervous system regulates our physiological arousal, but remember that sometimes our bodies behave in similar ways when we're angry as when we're scared. Our interpretations sometimes vary as well. If you see a picture of a face that's actually of an angry person, you might mistake that for a disgusted face, depending on what you think is going on in that picture. We judge emotions in large part because of the context. So why do we have multiple theories and haven't been able to reject any in favor of the one best one? Because emotions are complicated. We can't explain everything with any one of the three theories we just covered. And actually, there have been even more theories and attempts at explaining emotions, which you can read about in your textbook. Okay, that's it for this video. If you're taking this as an in-person class, we'll cover more from Chapter 10 in class. If this is an online-only class, you'll find the PowerPoint I use when I lecture over this chapter in Blackboard.